everyone, MeltingMan234 here, and welcome to another episode of Forgotten Media, where I dig up some stuff you may or may not have heard of. Today we'll be looking at 3 Sega handheld consoles, which are the Sega Game Gear, the Sega Mega Jet, and the Sega Nomad. So let's start off with the Game Gear. This was Sega's first handheld console that was in development in 1989 under the name Project Mercury. It was pretty common to have Sega's codenames being named after planets, just like how some of the Atari games are named after cats. The system was released in 1990 in Japan and 1991 in the US and Europe, and 1992 in Australia. This was the third handheld system to have color, and it also has a start button, a power button, a D-pad, buttons 1 and 2, a speaker, volume switch, a place for headphones, and a place to plug in for a charger. On the back there's a slot to plug in the games, and 2 doors that show where the batteries go in. There were 390 games that were made for the system, like Coca-Cola Kid, Popeye, Beach Volleyball, Pack Attack, Tails Adventure, Sonic Triple Trouble, and many others that were good and bad. The Game Gear had its share of accessories, such as the TV tuner, which lets you watch TV on the Game Gear, the Super Wide Gear, which helps magnify the screen to make it larger, very similar to the Game Boy magnifier, a car adapter which lets you charge it in the car, the Master Gear converter which allows you to play games from the Sega Master System, the gear-to-gear cable which allows you to plug in another Game Gear for 2-player mode, and the Power Pack and Battery Pack which helps the Game Gear last longer. The system was in competition with the Nintendo Game Boy, and it sold very well, but the system itself has only one flaw, and that is the battery life. Since the system uses 6 AA batteries, they drain them real fast, and the Game Gear can only last up to 3 to 4 hours. That's about the same amount of time as the 3DS has. After its sales in the stores and so on, the Game Gear was discontinued in early 1997, and as for its games, they were ported onto a few other media, such as Sonic Gems Collection and the Wii Virtual Console. Nowadays, it has been announced that the 3DS Virtual Console will feature Game Gear games. As for the system and the games, they can be found on eBay and such. Some of them are cheap, some of them are expensive, depending on how rare or in good condition they are. Next up is the Sega Mega Jet. This was a console that was only released in Japan in 1994, I think. It would play Mega Drive games, and the controller was exactly like a Genesis controller. The only difference with this one is that there is no screen, and you have to plug it in to make the TV work. What makes the system interesting is that this was only released in Japan Airlines, where you get to rent them and play them while you're on the plane to the next airport. The system has at least 4 games that were available at certain airlines, such as Super Monaco GP and Sonic the Hedgehog, but if you brought along your collection of Mega Drive games, then it'll work just fine. I'm not sure if they were able to take these home because nowadays the system is very rare and hard to find. And finally, we have the Sega Nomad, which was in development under the name Project Venus, and was later released in the US in 1995. Instead of localizing the Mega Jet, we got the Nomad instead. It has all the same features as the Mega Jet does, the only difference is that it's bulkier, it has a color screen, and plays Genesis games. There was going to be a touchscreen feature to the Nomad, but since the technology was too expensive, which means it would raise the price of the system even more, the idea was scrapped. This idea would later be used for the Nintendo DS. Nomad has had a few issues, such as the battery life, which was similar to the Game Gear, and rechargeable batteries are not recommended due to some voltage problems. They later made a rechargeable battery pack to make up for the loss. Out of all the Genesis games that work on the Nomad, there's only one game that wouldn't work, and that was the X-Men for the Genesis. In the computer level where you have to literally reset your Genesis to continue on, it is impossible to do it on a Nomad since it doesn't have a reset button. The Nomad didn't earn enough support to continue on, and it soon bit the dust. The reason for that is that the Mega Drive, aka Genesis, was on its last leg as video game companies were already hard at work making the next generation of video games such as the Sega Saturn, the Nintendo 64, and the PlayStation. Nowadays, finding the Nomad is a lot similar to trying to find the Game Gear. Some of them are expensive, some of them are cheap, and it all depends on how rare they are or how in good condition they are. In closing, the Game Gear was a pretty cool system, the Mega Jet was a very interesting system when it came out, and the Nomad was a nice way to play Genesis games on the go. That is, if it wasn't for the short battery life. Well, that wraps up this episode of Forgotten Media, so this is MeltingMan234 signing out.